Okay, so let's begin.
We're ready? All right, thanks, Sarah, and hello, New Englanders. As a born and raised New Englander, I give you a nod. I migrated to North Carolina as an adult, but grew up in Vermont, so it's always nice to be around fellow Northerners. Anyway, so my name is Erin Carey. I am the Conservation Policy Director for the North Carolina Sierra Club. And Sarah has asked me here tonight to talk to you about the proliferation of CAFOs in North Carolina and some of the social and environmental problems they're causing. There we go. Okay, so we'll start with just straight definitions. A concentrated animal feeding operation is a CAFO. It's a facility where animals are kept confined and fed for 45 days or more. They don't forage, they don't seek out their own food. Food is brought to them. It's usually scientifically modified for quick growth in the animals. And CAFO is actually a branch of, or a type of animal feeding operation. So it is defined by how many animals are in a certain area, and also by whether or not their waste comes in contact with the water supply, which is part of our problem. When you talk about CAFOs in North Carolina, often people are talking about swine, just because it's gotten a lion's share of the political attention and the media attention with some of the catastrophic spills that have happened in the state. But certainly it's not just swine. We have a chicken and just poultry in general CAFO explosion happening in North Carolina, and that's largely because it is generally unregulated. You do not need a permit to operate a poultry CAFO in North Carolina, just to build one. So we have chickens as in egg laying facilities, broilers, and of course turkeys. So two of the myriad problems with CAFOs, specifically in North Carolina, that we're going to talk about, and there are many problems, are water quality and human health. So water quality, we're going to look at these equations to help sort of baseline us on what the issues are. So we have porous soils where a lot of these CAFOs are located in the coastal plain where we have really sandy soils. So porous soils plus billions of gallons of liquid waste, which you're going to see in a couple slides, equals bad news for groundwater. A lot of these open pools or cesspools are unlined. And so anything that percolates through the soil gets into the groundwater, which is really bad news for those people who are on wells nearby. Lack of regulation plus these open cesspools is bad news for surface water too, whether it's a flooding event or a catastrophic structural failure in a lagoon. Oftentimes, more often than we should, we see this waste reach surface water. And of course, environmental justice. When you talk about human health, you're talking about environmental justice when it comes to CAFOs. So systematic racism plus purchased political power is bad news for the neighbors of these CAFOs. It's the purchased political power takes the power away from the people who live nearby and gives them very few options when CAFOs move into their neighborhoods. So we're going to look at sort of the 60,000 foot view here. This is obviously North Carolina. You'll see a lot of spots. So every single one of these little spots represents a CAFO in North Carolina. The purple ones are poultry, and we have these not because the state keeps track of them, but because allied organizations have used both satellite technology and flyovers to map them. Because they were getting so out of control with their numbers, we had no idea even where to focus our efforts. So those are the purple ones. We're going to talk mostly about the swine CAFOs, which you see are centered mostly in these three counties. There's 100 counties in North Carolina. And the outlined counties here are the ones that are most prone to flooding that also have CAFOs in them. So you see there's definitely a concentration of where these things pop up. you'll see a map that's similar to this a little later in the presentation. All right, so this is just to give you an idea of sort of the concentration of these facilities on the ground or in any given county. So this is Duplin County. This is one of those counties that was almost all blue. This is 13 square miles, and there are 34 farms in the picture. So you can see, and there's residential houses and neighborhoods in here too. So these things will pop up anywhere. Now I want to be careful about the word farm. We don't use it when talking about CAFOs. This is not my slide. This is a slide from the Waterkeeper Alliance, specifically Cape Fear River Watch, and they refer to them as factory farms. But the word farm is sort of invokes, you know, cows out in the pasture and people feeding the chickens and that kind of thing. And that is absolutely not what's happening here. So, and the Port Council tries to use that as like you know, this is family farming. And so we stay away from the word as much as possible. Once again, this is an aerial view, a satellite view of Duplin County. And we've got all these little red circles, which once again are the CAFOs. But what I'd like you to notice here is these blue lines are surface water. And you can see how close a lot of these facilities are to surface water and how dangerous you might think it is to store billions of gallons of waste this close to them. And just to give you a really specific idea of what that looks like, these are both CAFOs, relatively small CAFOs actually. The lagoons you see, or the pits you see are, that's all animal waste. And this is all surface water right next door. So you can imagine any sort of spill or collapse of these lagoons would contaminate lots of swampland, and all of this runs into the Cape Fear River, which is drinking water source for over 100,000 people, including me. So what could go wrong, right? So let's talk about the lagoon and spray system. So the lagoon and spray system is an antiquated waste treatment system that has been in place since hog farms, or I should say CAFOs, established themselves in North Carolina. And certainly there are better ways to treat waste than this, but the state has not forced CAFO owners to invest in that technology. So this is what we're stuck with. The lagoon and spray system works like this. These are houses, these are hog houses at the bottom of your picture. The animals are in the hog houses. They don't ever go outside. And there are slats in the floor. So when the pigs urinate, defecate, if there's afterbirth, whatever is coming out of the animals is dropping through the slats in the floor and periodically is flushed into this lagoon. That's the only treatment. So essentially these are open cesspools. They're flushed through these little pipes that you see. They're not that little, they just look little from up here. And I'll draw your attention to the top left-hand corner of the lagoon. That is built up sludge. So what happens here is when all of this waste is pumped into this lagoon, the solids will sink to the bottom and get sort of, they'll get anaerobic treatment from bacteria. And this is passive treatment. This is not an active treatment system. Unlike with human waste where we treat it both chemically and physically and mechanically, there's no treatment for this other than this passive anaerobic treatment. And that actually is the color that you see, which is really specific to hog CAFOs, that this bacteria and the lagoons turn this color, which makes them really easy to see from the air. The liquid waste floats to the top and it's sort of like a supernatant. It becomes very concentrated with nutrients. And every once in a while, the operator, who's the one who operates the system, the waste system, will spray that liquid onto nearby fields. And it looks kind of like this. So this is the spray part of our lagoon and spray system. You'll notice that these guns shoot very far and very high. There are some rules governing this application process. One, the feed crop, which is the plants that they're spraying, has to be the the field has to be 95% covered. It has to be, it can't be dormant. The crop needs to be healthy. It can't be saturated. You can't spray when it's raining, and you can't spray when it's about to rain. So operators are supposed to study or to mind these rules, but you can imagine that the system is pretty ripe for abuse. You'll notice too how the waste is aerating into small droplets. Those droplets are picked up by the wind and carry over to neighboring properties, getting on people's houses, cars, and certainly impacting how much they can use their homes, or at least the outside of their homes. The smell here, by the way, is, as you might imagine, pretty horrific. And just to illustrate some bad actors here, this photo is taken in a flyover from the water keepers. And they do that, they'll fly over these counties just to take pictures because the regulation in North Carolina is so limited. Our regulatory agency, the Department of Environmental Quality, has been gutted as far as its budget is concerned. And so they just do not have the people power to get out here. But you'll see here, this is actually an active spray field. It's hard to see, but these little spray heads here are going. This person is breaking a handful of rules in its permit right now, violations in its permit. You can see the waste is pooling. This is not a crop that is currently active. It's a dormant crop. You can tell this might be a winter crop. And not only that, but this is leaving the property, which is a huge violation of their permit. Now, whether or not DEQ was able to do anything once this photo was submitted to them, I'm not sure. But at least we have people in the air sort of bird dogging this. So just to give you some perspective on how much waste is generated by these animals. There are 10 million hogs in Eastern North Carolina. And as you might imagine, that's a lot more hogs than people. And of course, our poultry numbers are exploding, as I mentioned. So just to give you an idea of the kind of waste problem we're talking about, 800,000 pigs, or a large farm, right? And this is 800,000 pigs a year, not at once, can produce over 1.6 million tons of waste a year. That's one farm or one facility, which is 1.5 times more than the annual sewage production of the city of Philadelphia. And so the difference here is that the city of Philadelphia is treating their sewage, where what's happening to this is it's being dumped in an open pond and left there. And that's just one facility in one county. It's a lot of waste. And so in the traditional farm, in traditional farming, what would happen is you would grow feed for your crops. You would grow crops to feed your animals. You would feed your animals. You would use the waste to fertilize the crops. It's a nutrient cycle. This model completely shatters that cycle. All of the nutrients are imported into the state in the form of soy and corn and wheat and fed to these animals, but the nutrients stay here and they stay in these open pits. The Environmental Working Group put together a couple of, we'll put together these graphics, which I think are really are pretty successful in showing their point. So in 3 counties, 113 million chickens, just 3 counties, remember there's 100 in North Carolina. They produce 1 million tons of waste each year, which is 4,500 times the weight of the Statue of Liberty in 1 year, 3 counties. And on the other side with swine, 4.4 billion, same 3 counties, manure and urine produced by swine each year, enough to fill 6,700 Olympic-sized swimming pools. So the burden that we are putting on these counties and the folks in these counties and on these water systems is tremendous. And the fact that it is so underregulated is just a travesty. So let's talk about water quality impacts. What is in this stuff when it gets into the water? As you might imagine, waste is pretty high in nutrients, particularly animal waste, and the usual suspects, nitrogen, phosphorus, but potassium as well. And so when these nutrients get into a water body, let's say a river, you get an algal bloom because algae love nutrients. And so they go crazy, they grow, but eventually they run out of nutrients. And so they die, sink to the bottom, and they start to break down. That breaking down process requires a lot of oxygen. And so that pulls oxygen out of the water, dissolved oxygen out of the water. The putting of too many nutrients in the water is called eutrophication. And the breaking down the algal blooms leads to fish kills, which is what you're seeing here. This is in the northern part of the state. And airborne toxins are also common with algal blooms. If you've ever heard of a red tide, Florida has them a lot as well. They can be harmful to humans and obviously to aquatic life. If you're going to talk about waste, you're definitely going to talk about bacteria, also released in this waste stream. So E. coli, Enterococcus, Listeria, all of them can cause serious illness. And sort of a rising problem, and one that certainly we have in the human population, is antibiotic resistance. What happens is these animals are treated with antibiotics subtherapeutically. So before they actually get sick, they're treating them with antibiotics to make sure that they don't get sick. But the problem is that antibiotic load comes out in the waste and then is out in nature. And so what happens is we get a lot of bacteria exposed to a lot of antibiotics, and bacteria become immune to those antibiotics or resistant to those antibiotics, which is very problematic when it gets back into the human population. Pathogens, of course, and also heavy metals, things like arsenic, will build up in the sludge. And so if there is a spill, that also releases into the environment and causes problems for both aquatic species, wildlife, and humans. It can cause long-term health problems. Okay, so you can't really talk about North Carolina without talking about hurricanes, because hurricanes love us. They hit us on a fairly regular basis. I'm going to talk about one in particular. This is Florence from 2018. And Florence was a mean one. She dumped between 15 and 25 inches of rain in the coastal plain, so in the CAFO heavy areas. That's a lot of rain. Keeping in mind that billions of pounds of animal waste are stored in the floodplain in North Carolina, in the coastal plain. This was really big trouble for water quality, and also for water quality and for drinking water quality, certainly. Those waste pits are not designed for modern storms. They're really designed for storms of the past, and a lot of them are really old. So the infrastructure hasn't necessarily been taken care of, or there's only so long that earthen berms can hold. So either the pits during this storm, some of them failed entirely, catastrophic structural failure, everything just poured out because the berm broke, or like the one in the bottom picture, others were just flooded, they were just inundated. And there is nothing you can do about that. So what happens is all the waste is picked up in the floodwaters and taken out into the environment, which you can kind of see the little line here of waste. And there were numerous reports during the storm and certainly afterwards of this waste and sludge floating through people's yards, keeping them in their houses well after the storm was gone because it wasn't safe to be outside. And just another couple aerials, so you get the idea of how much water there was. And excuse me, the brown stuff you see floating on the top is sludge. There were 110 lagoons breached during this storm, which was billions of gallons of hog waste. And that was just hog waste. Never mind what happened to the poultry. So folks have raw animal sewage flowing through their yards. So we're going to talk about environmental justice. The EPA has defined it for us: the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income. with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. So that's the definition. We're not seeing a lot of that in North Carolina these days, particularly around CAFOs. I told you were going to see something similar to the earlier map, and this is what I was talking about. Once again, the Environmental Working Group pulled this together a few years ago. Steve Wing and some researchers at NC State laid two maps on top of each other. So the little black dots are industrial hog operations, or CAFOs, hog CAFOs. The reddish squares, the shaded squares, are the percent of the population that was enslaved in 1860. And you can see there's a very strong correlation between where the CAFOs are built and where populations of color are located, are found. And what happened was these are the highest concentration of Black and Latino populations, but formerly enslaved people settled when they were freed. They were either sharecroppers or their families bought land in the area. So many of these families have been there for generations. They've had this land for generations. And so you can see that it aligns with the highest concentrations of swine CAFOs. And so in the studies I've read, although it is very obvious that communities of color and low-income communities are suffering at the hands of this industry, it seems like it's not an intentional act. It's not that companies are looking for Black neighborhoods to put CAFOs in. They're looking for the path of least resistance. So they're looking for communities and for counties where land is inexpensive and where people don't have the political power or the voice to fight back. So whether or not that's the same thing, I would argue that's the same thing, but that's the conclusion that the academics have drawn. Either way, when you're on the ground and you see how these folks are suffering, it is heartbreaking. And it's not just that these places stink. There are actual studied and observed health effects of living near these facilities. Aside from the air, water, and soil pollution that is obvious from the CAFOs, folks who live nearby have an increased risk of death from serious disease like bacteria infection, a higher rate of infant mortality, and more respiratory problems like asthma and wheezing. And this is after controlling for other factors. Studies more specifically, kids who attend schools near CAFOs have higher levels of asthma and wheezing compared to those who attend schools further away. And residents near CAFOs have higher rates of asthma, anemia, kidney disease, infant mortality, and infections. And residents within 1.5 miles of CAFOs report elevated blood pressure, eye, nose, and throat irritation, difficulty breathing, nausea, and chest tightness. The problems worsen as the odor worsens, mostly because the odor is indicative of hydrogen sulfide, which is an irritant, and it is the one thing that you can smell and you can tell that it's there, but it means there are other things around too that are health hazards. The impact on folks' everyday life has been crippling, really. You can see in rural areas, and I grew up in rural Vermont. We hung our clothes out. In rural areas in North Carolina, it's the same, but most don't, because you can see in this top picture, there's a CAFO right, 50 yards away, and everyone's laundry ends up smelling like pig poo. The gentleman at the bottom is standing on his property. A CAFO was built right across the street, and that's piles of chicken dirt or chicken poo, right in front of his front yard. Liquid waste that's shot out of those guns that you saw earlier covers houses, cars, laundry, as I mentioned. Neighbors are often forced to cover their mouths and noses because of that hydrogen sulfide, because of the irritants that get into their lungs and their mucous membranes. Outdoor living is impossible. So, folks who have been on this land for generations, they can't have outdoor birthday parties for their kids. They can't have family cookouts. They can't open their windows to let fresh air in. Their quality of life has dropped precipitously with this industry moving in, and it seems like there's very little they can do about it. And of course, clouds and flies, as we can associate with waste. In the next slide, we're going to start talking about the nuisance suits that were filed against Smithfield Foods. But during those suits, they had scientists go into folks' homes and swab the walls, and they found swine fecal bacteria on the interior of folks' homes. So in 2014, 26 suits were filed, 500 people filed against Murphy Brown, which is a subsidiary of Smithfield Foods. Smithfield is the big player in pork in North Carolina and actually in the world. It is a multi-billion multinational company, forgive me. And it's owned by the Chinese. It didn't used to be, but it is now. So the complainants, filed for nuisance related to odor, spray drift, noise from both the animals and trucks, coming in and out 24 hours a day, and clouds of flies. These nuisance suits kept coming back, the verdicts kept coming back as guilty, and $473 million was awarded to the plaintiffs. It was, of course, challenged in North Carolina Supreme Court, brought to federal court, and held up there. The money has not been distributed to this day. In 2017, the North Carolina General Assembly capped the monetary awards that nuisance claims related to ag or forestry operations could be extracted. So as soon as nuisance suits were won and awards were given, the General Assembly passed a law that said you can't bring up nuisance suits, and we're going to cap how much you get, even if you do. So if you're wondering about North Carolina politics, the pork industry has enormous political power in our state, and the campaign contributions to decision makers who are running for office or are currently in office continue to increase, both from big pork and big egg and big chicken. The pro-ag laws and policies continue to limit what can be revealed about complaints. So complaints around a certain facility are not public information anymore. Criminalize reporting crimes on factory farms, although I do think this was overturned recently in a federal court. Essentially, it was a whistleblower law that said that you couldn't blow the whistle on what was going on inside these farms or these houses. Reduce the ability to file nuisance suits against bad actors, as I mentioned in the previous slide. And reduce the budgets of environmental regulatory agencies, which I sort of mentioned at the beginning of all this. Gutting DEQ is their favorite hobby. And without a regulatory agency, I mean, the industry basically has its way with the state. And prohibiting the additional regulation of factory farms kind of goes along with gutting the environmental regulatory agencies, and then even making end runs around existing regulations. I mean, we have very few rules in place, and even those, they make up laws to sort of get around them to favor the pork industry. So that's what we're dealing with. And you might be wondering, why would North Carolina vote for such people? Well, we kind of don't, actually. In theory, North Carolina is a purple state. Registered voters are 35% Democrat, 30% Republican, and 35% unaffiliated. And I show you this picture because we are the most gerrymandered state in the union. These are two congressional districts. These are national congressional districts. Our state ones are just as bad, that are just egregious and almost hilarious if it wasn't so impactful on our politics. These two were in question in federal court. The North Carolina Supreme Court shot them down because they said they were racially gerrymandered. But the Supreme Court, the current Supreme Court, upheld those drawings. But at this point, gerrymandering favors the Republicans. I'm not saying that Democrats don't gerrymander, they do. Republicans have just made an art form out of it. And what's happened is the districts have been drawn such that Democrats almost cannot get power because we have districts that look like this and aren't a fair representation of that district or who lives in that area. As I mentioned, the Supreme Court blocked the maps because they ruled that they were drawn based on race. You can gerrymander based on political affiliation, but you cannot based on race. And the Supreme Court found that they had. The US Supreme Court overruled. So right now we're stuck with a lot of really crazy looking districts at the federal level and at the state level, taking control of the General Assembly really difficult. So after all that, the question is and I understand this is not the most uplifting presentation, and I do this work, so I really do understand, but there are things that we can do. So what can we do, we being the Sierra Club? Well, the chapter, the North Carolina chapter, will continue to bird dog NC regulations and bad actors. So we'll continue to be there, pointing out when people mess up, pointing out where the government should be paying attention. We're part of an alliance called the CAFO Roundtable, which is a group of allies that work against the industry and try to engage in the process to try to make rules better, since we're sort of crippled politically right now. That's the least we can do. So we participate in the general permit stakeholder process. So we give our input on how we think that the general permit, which is the permit that all swine CAFOs fall under, things that should be added to it, things we think should be taken out of it. We participate in that process, and we make sure our volunteers do as well. Excuse me. We're working on developing a public-facing social media campaign to educate the public. What we've found is that when people find out what's going on, they are evangelized. They're horrified. The problem is people don't know, and people tend not to think about where their bacon comes from or where anything comes from, really. And so once they know, they want to do something. And our final goal, well, at least my final goal, is to prioritize CAFO proliferation at a national level. We've been working with the Michigan chapter as well to try to put this in front of the national board and convince them that this is an issue that it's not just North Carolina, it is all across the country. It is a justice issue, it's an environmental issue, and it is an animal rights issue, and the club needs to pay attention. If we can successfully make that argument, that will open up funding, and it'll unlock staff time as well, so we can spend more time concentrating on the political aspect of things and also pressure on the administration. So what can we do as individuals? Well, now that you know what's going on, you can teach other people. You can educate members of the public on that issue. Like I said, people don't know, and they don't think about it, and that's, you know, understandable. We have a lot to think about, but this is an issue that is not going away, and in fact, it gets almost exponentially worse every year. So the more people who know about it, the better. Support candidates who recognize the issue. So Massachusetts, I don't actually know what your CAFO situation is up there, but supporting candidates isn't necessarily just candidates in your state. If you want to get involved in North Carolina politics, which, cool boy, if you do, good on you, because it's a mess down here. But if you do, or you find candidates that you'd like to support, do that and spread the word. And please pay attention to the Federal Farm Act. Currently, the Federal Farm Act, what we do is we subsidize farms that grow corn, soybean, and wheat. And this is essentially the feed for these animals that are in North Carolina and in other CAFOs across country. So what we're doing is we're subsidizing growing food that a multi-billion-dollar company is feeding their animals. At the same time, they are violating civil rights and destroying the environment. So perhaps we shouldn't do that. Perhaps we should spend our money doing something else, like promoting smaller farms that grow produce, so we don't have to import so much of our produce. And the idea is food, not feed. Senator Cory Booker is one of the proponents of food, not feed. And if you're interested in getting involved, just give it a Google. And I think that's it. I think that's all I have. So I'm happy to field any questions folks may have. And thank you for having me.
Okay, thank you so much, Erin, for a fabulous presentation. And if you could please stop screen sharing now so we could just have more room and see everybody.
Sure. Let me...
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. Just the stop button. There you go.
All right, great. And now, if you would like to ask any questions of Erin, please, oh, I'm sorry, I accidentally muted you. Yeah, please feel free to go off mute if you do have a question, or raise your hand so we know who's asking. Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, we have, let's see, under reactions. Yes. Andrea. Yeah, let's see. Okay, go ahead.
Hi, fantastic presentation, very informative. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, very interesting. I wonder if there are, from a company perspective, you mentioned Smithfield Foods, and I'm not on top of them, and I didn't realize that they were owned by a Chinese company. I think that's very interesting. Is there anything more that you know about the company side of things? I'm involved in public equity markets, investing, and activism. So I'd be very interested in any information you have from that side of things.
Yeah, sure. So and I'm not sure what kind of information specifically you'd be looking for. The company side of things isn't my gig, but in that CAFO roundtable, we do have folks who that's what they keep track of. So if you want to shoot me an email, I think I put it on the last slide, maybe. I'll put it in the chat. If you'd like to shoot me an email, I'm happy to connect you with folks who know about that side of the issue.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. Yes, John, go ahead.
I joined a little late. Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry I joined a little late. At the very end of the presentation, you mentioned the Farm Bill, and you did mention the food not feed mantra from Senator Booker. But I'm wondering, you know, because in Massachusetts, that's probably like the #1 thing that we as citizens might be able to like lobby our legislators on the Farm Bill. I'm not sure if it's fully baked yet, but I know, and whether it's even going to be voted on in September or not. There's some talk that it might get pushed. But from your perspective, what other like key elements of the Farm Bill do you think we should be aware of?
I work for the chapter. I don't work on federal legislation or anything at all. So unfortunately, I am not the person to ask for that. I can tell you anything you want to know about the North Carolina Farm Bill, but because my work is very state oriented, the only reason that I know about the food not feed issue is because of my engagement with this, and because the Michigan chapter made me aware of it, and they actually went and met Senator Booker and lobbied on the Hill, which I can't do because all of my time is C3. So unfortunately, I can't answer that question. I apologize.
Okay.
Well, maybe I can just highlight to everybody who's listening that if you don't know about the Farm Bill that's coming up in September, it's probably something to read up on, because it comes up every 5 years, and it affects everything you can think about in agriculture, and also things that you don't think about, like the fossil fuel industry, and giving food to poor folks. That's what they're fighting about now, is the SNAP benefits, and you'll hear a lot about that, but you don't hear about the environmental aspects of the bill. There's a lot to it.
Okay, thank you, John. I just would like to add that farming, in comparison to other states, is not a large industry here in Massachusetts. And we do have a few CAFOs, but again, in comparison to others, there aren't that many. And in fact, many of our farms are, if not organic necessarily, are at least, like taking steps to be more environmentally friendly. Obviously, as Massachusetts residents, what we need to do is work on this at the federal level to help our the rest of the states in this country. And I would like to add that as chair of the Plant-Based Planet team, in the chat, I have posted first a Google Doc that contains recipes for plant-based pork substitutes, everything from bacon to ham to some ethnic dishes. And I've also included a link to our plant-based cooking demonstration, which is this Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where our members take turns demonstrating plant-based recipes. So just wanted to mention that as well. And let's see, Frank, you have a question? Frank Powell?
Thank you, Sarah. And I love Plant-Based Planet. Yeah. Erin, very effective presentation.
Thank you.
Delighted that I took the time to listen. I'm not too far away in rural South Carolina. And I can't get in to see any of these operations. And it's not because my friends won't let me in. They break laws if they do. And it's tragic what's going on, I guess, from the cruelty standpoint. So I just have a few specific questions to keep myself current.
Okay.
What is the age of the animal in the pig farm when it is slaughtered?
Oh, when I'm okay, so I think it's 48 months. But it may not be that long. And I also think it depends on the pig. I hate to say that. And depends on what they're slaughtering it for. The different farms have different, so certain CAFOs specialize in raising piglets for, a month and a half, and then they ship off those piglets to the next step, and then they get new piglets in. So I'm not sure what the final step of that is. I only know about the process of shifting the animals from one facility to another, because they don't take them from pigletness to grown hog in one place. They're shipped around until they're fully grown, but I'm not sure what that age is.
Mm-hmm. And the notion of food, not feed. So what are these animals eating? You made the point, a lot of it comes in from outside of the local area, North Carolina.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're eating a highly regulated, highly scientifically modified diet of vitamin additives. But I mean, the base of it is corn and soy. But there's a lot of other things added to it to help the animals grow faster. I mean, the animals themselves have been genetically modified to grow faster, but the feed is also designed to help them with that growth. But it is primarily soy and corn with proprietary mixings. In fact, the folks who own the facilities where the pigs are don't even know what's in the feed. It is brought in by the host, by Smithfield essentially, and they're not allowed to know what's in the feed.
Wow.
Okay.
And
okay, yeah, Frank. Oh, yeah. Please, let's let someone else go first.
Certainly.
Okay, sure. We have someone else waiting. Okay, Judith, you're next. What's your question, please? You're on mute. Okay. Yes. Hi.
Yeah. I'm so sorry. I'm on my bed. I'm very tired from a long day.
It's okay.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much, Erin. That's a great conversation, and I feel it's a big concern. I'm working with low-income communities, especially older adults. I would like to know how we can make people aware about this concern, how they can get engaged, because I think that's all of us. Many times they are the most affected, and believe in me, they don't know about, this challenge. They don't know what's going on in the community. So how we can meet those communities and let them know what's going on?
That's a great question. And what I can do is provide you context. We have a lot of community groups that work with neighbors and within the communities that CAFOs impact, as well as, sort of the bigger green organizations that work at sort of a higher legislative level. And I can give you connections to both of them. And you could get any information you want. Maybe you saw the graphics that Environmental Working Group provided, and they can provide stuff like that, and it's all on their website. So I'm happy to provide some of those. I can give them to Sarah, and maybe she can share them out.
Yeah.
But thank you for the work that you do.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? All right. I would like to ask a question, Erin. How do people? You said that people become evangelized when they find out about this, and does that mean that they start taking actions against these companies?
To some degree, yes. People make personal choices to either stop eating either pork or meat entirely, or stop buying Smithfield's products. Mostly folks get very frustrated with the political environment here in North Carolina because we are really in a headlock. And it's very difficult to make any progress. And so what we tell people is, find candidates, devote your time, devote your money towards elections. That's what's going to make a difference. We're going to have to change it there before we can change it anywhere. But we also get people involved in things like the stakeholder process with the general permit, which is coming up soon. And folks write, they can write in comments to the Department of Environmental Quality. They can make suggestions. They can tell the department how they feel about the general permit. And that's helpful, as far as numbers are concerned. But it is we've been working on this for years, and we've made very little headway just because we're working against very deep pockets and very powerful people. So when I say people become evangelized, they become horrified and they change personal things, but it is very difficult to take action to change this on a greater scale, which is why I'm hoping that our national board will see that and perhaps prioritize CAFOs at a national level.
Yes, I certainly hope so too. And once we make this recording, I can send it to you. Please feel free to pass it on to anyone at the national level. And that goes for everybody. It should take a few days for us to record this presentation, and I will send it out to everybody once it's available. It will be on our YouTube channel. So please feel free to pass this on, because we do want people to know about this, people who are affiliated with the Sierra Club as well as anywhere else.
Absolutely.
And is this also, do you also know, Erin, if there is a similar situation in other states, or how do other states compare to North Carolina?
Well, we have other states. Michigan they have sort of an influx of CAFOs now because there actually is a moratorium on swine CAFOs in North Carolina. So they can't build any new ones. They can expand the ones that are existing, but there's no new permits. And the reason for that is, and when the debate was happening about 20 years ago, a legislator figured out that a CAFO was going to be built near his golf course in Pinehurst. And so he cast the deciding vote on banning all new CAFOs because he was upset it was going to be near his golf course. So, we'll take it, but that's, people don't act until it hits home. So anyway, that is to say that because Smithfield can't create any more CAFOs in North Carolina for swine, they're moving to other states. And so what they're doing is they're seeking out other states that don't have any regulations or have very lax regulations, and they're moving there. And I know Michigan is one of those states.
Okay, and John has another question.
Okay.
Yeah, I wanted to follow on to Sarah's question. Do you know of cow CAFOs? What states? Because I would think that for climate change, that's probably even a bigger impact than pigs. Do you
Yeah.
know what states have a lot of, I know that I know that there's huge cattle CAFO. I'm just wondering what states they're in.
I'm actually not familiar with, we have a couple here in North Carolina, but we don't have, unfortunately, my expertise does not really go outside of North Carolina borders, but that is one of the things that Michigan is concerned about as well, is the cattle CAFOs. So I don't know if they are necessarily like one of the bigger ones, but I do know out west, I mean, Iowa, certainly. Iowa's the #1 pork producer in the country. Believe it or not, North Carolina is only 2 or 3, depending on the day. And so, yeah, some of the Midwestern states, that's where the cattle are.
Well, John, thank you. That's a good idea for a future presentation of the Plant-Based Planet team. So we'll see. I'll keep you posted, Erin, if we do come up with one. And
Okay.
any other questions from people? Okay, let's see, Frank, did you have a follow-up question? And we had to move on to Judith. So do you have another question?
Nice of you to ask, but I do not.
Okay.
I will tell you, though, that I've been kicked out of a big Fisher packing plant in Grand Island, Nebraska, twice in the last 10 years. The first time was purely innocent. You know, I see here's this large CAFO. Can I go in and take a tour? Armed guards.
Yeah, they don't
it's
let
the
you do
most
that here.
grisly. They have their own power plant, and you see the poor animals come in one end, and mostly what comes out the other end is waste, but a finished product, refrigerated animal. Yeah, it's tragic. And it makes good sense that for 25 years, we've kept people from seeing this operation. And I just grew up next to it in Louisville, Kentucky, at a slaughterhouse. So I grew up understanding how all this worked. But unfortunately, your generation did not, because our government wouldn't let you see it.
Yeah, well, we are finding out though. So, okay. All right, well, thank you for that comment, Frank. Judith, anybody else have any questions? All right. Okay, well, Erin, again, thank you so much for your time, for giving us
Thank
this
you all.
wonderful presentation. We will do our best to try to publicize this and, you know, do what we can as residents of other states to see what we can help, because I understand this is a national issue that, you know, once the pigs are slaughtered, who knows where they come from. So, you know, we realize that this affects us all in the country. This is really not just North Carolina's problem. It is a problem for everyone in this country. So again, thank you for your time. We'll hopefully do what we can to help you as Sierra Club members and active citizens. And thank you everybody for attending. Thank you, Emma, for your help and for staying throughout the presentation. And we hope to see you at future events. Good night.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Have a good night.
You too.